The World Bank is predicting some bad growth ahead. Just out a little over an hour ago, global growth to contract 2.5% in 2012. That's off 0.2%. Hey, the euro economy to contract 0.3%. That actually seems a little light. I'd love to get your take on that, Sudeep. And 3 developing countries slowing to 5.3% in 2012. Sudeep, I don't know how credibly you take the World Bank and its predictions. Certainly better than not, but I kind of look at this number and say, euro economy to contract only 0.3%? I just don't buy that.
Dennis, that's a perfectly legitimate thing to question in that case. If you look at their overall global picture, 2.5% global growth in 2012 would be the slowest of the recovery, slower than we had last year. And that's something to be concerned about, because if you look at it, the baseline assumption that they have in all of these forecasts is that the Eurozone doesn't fall apart, that the crisis abates in the same way that it has over the last 2 years. And so this is all assuming a fairly rosy scenario of everything kind of muddling along as it has before. For the Euro area, all of these institutions that come up with growth figures, and especially the international ones, which of course have Europe as part of their membership, they don't want to get too dire. And so most projections for the Euro area as a whole show some small recession as a whole. So
Sudeep, they're holding back. They're holding back on us. This is the intellectual equivalent of a Spanish bank with a bad portfolio of condo loans on a beach somewhere. Do they know that the growth is going to be slower? They just don't want to say it.
Well, one thing they're doing in all of these forecasts is trying to send the message that if policy actually picks up and catches up with some of these problems, then you'd only have a mild recession in Europe. And what they're trying to do is encourage policymakers. They actually do have some pretty dire scenarios in here as well. If we were to face another crisis, for instance, developing countries, instead of seeing 5% growth collectively, might see maybe 1% growth collectively. And so if you actually start factoring in a financial crisis and the effects of it, then things look pretty ugly. And they actually have some downside scenarios in all of these cases. But you could start imagining all sorts of really even worse scenarios. All of this shows, though, Dennis, that what we're seeing now is just from the effects of the slowdown in Europe. You're having this hit trade flows in Asia, remittances, tourism. All of these effects are really dragging down the entire world just with the state that we're in now, and obviously it could get worse.
You know, it seems remarkable, Sudeep, to think about the creation of the World Bank and the idea that the European countries would be the stabilizing forces for the world economy as participants, contributors to the World Bank. In your dealings with them, is there a feeling that somehow the world's gone out of whack or astray, that we're now talking about rescuing Europe?
What the World Bank, of course, focuses on is developing countries the most. And one of the things that their role is, Europe, parts of Europe were developing countries before, and now they focus a lot on the rest of the emerging economies, which have produced somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of global growth since the crisis. And so the concern here is that the engine for global growth is now starting to die down a little bit, and that's a big problem, especially because the ammunition that we always talk about when we talk about the Federal Reserve and the ECB and central banks in the advanced economies, the ammunition that emerging economies had through fiscal stimulus is a lot lower than it was before coming out of the crisis. And one reason we were able to rebound so well out of the crisis on a global basis is because emerging economies were able to bounce back using their ammunition depots, and they really just don't have as much as they had before. And that suggests that if we go into another crisis, it could be even worse than people are imagining.